Welcome back to the Invisible Podcast. My name is Dr. Ashton Wilson. I'm your host of this somewhat frequent podcast that I get to host and have the most amazing guests come and join me and chat all things invisible illness. And today we are not short of excellent in this room. We have the fabulous Jeannie Di Bon joining us all the way from England. Welcome, Jeannie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. That's very kind of you. Yeah, delighted to be here. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. Now, not only is Jeannie the founder of the Zebra Club, which I can't wait to hear all about, but she is also a published author. And I have your book here. For anyone watching on YouTube, you'll see me holding the book. It is The Integral Movement Method for Hypermobility Management. And you've released this year. Congratulations on becoming a published author. That's amazing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, very proud of that book. It's not just me. I've got a couple of guest authors in there. So Lara Bloom, the CEO of the EDS Society, has written the foreword and shared a bit of her personal journey. And then I have Dr. Alan Hakim, who probably most people, used to be a rheumatologist here in London. He now works for the EDS Society, but he wrote, what is EDS and, what's its presentation. And then I have Dr. Leslie Russick, who is a professor of physical therapy from the United States. She wrote all about pain, because obviously pain is a big factor of living with the conditions I work with. And so I thought I really want a chapter that's dedicated to pain and how it presents itself in hypermobile patients. And then the rest of the book goes into my integral movement method, which has 6 principles to it. And we delve deep into each of those principles throughout the rest of the book.
It is a fantastic book. I have it. So I had to run and get it. I had to run and get it from my bedroom because I read it at night before I go to bed, which is very sweet. I hope all the listeners enjoy that little tidbit of how I wind down at night as I read about how to help hypermobile people, if that gives you an insight into how I work. It really is a great book. You've done such a fabulous job and everything that you've done with the Zebra Club. But before we go into that, tell us, what have you been up to this week? How is life over in London?
Oh, gosh, well, life in London has been challenging recently for us because we've been having so many heat waves. And of course, so apart from being, an author and the founder of the Zebra Club, I'm also a patient myself. So I live with hypermobile EDS, POTS, MCAS and chronic fatigue. So I'm very lucky I scored all those lovely, what should we call them, comorbidities or diagnoses. So living in extreme heat, which we've had here, which is very unusual, has been challenging for me and for obviously a lot of patients in the UK. We're just not used to it. So POTS has been struggling, MCAS has been struggling, so much fatigue, just trying to deal with this heat. But yes, we've got obviously lots of strategies and things to deal with that. But yeah, life for people over here has been quite challenging due to the weather. So yeah, that's, but still trying to work, obviously, and keep, obviously, the Zebra Club running, doing podcasts like this and interviews. And yeah, so we're busy, but yeah, challenging.
I know, like we were discussing before we jumped on this call, the idea of a heat wave in England. Now, most of my relatives live in England, and so I know firsthand that there is no air conditioning. That is not a thing that is a priority in a British home. So I can imagine the difficulties that you're all having trying to, sleep and live in these hot environments. It must be hard on your body. Absolutely.
Yeah. Incredibly challenging, especially because, like you say, we're just not used to it and we're not set up for it. So yeah, lots of electrolytes, lots of resting, obviously trying not to push through. If you're fatigued by this heat, try not to push through that, resting when we need to rest. Obviously I love movement. I'm a movement therapist, but doing that movement early in the morning before it gets, I just can't do it. I just cannot do it. So I have to do it early in the morning or in the evening when it's cooler. So yeah, just adapting schedules and things. But yeah, sleep obviously is hugely affected. So many people are not sleeping. And then that impacts so many other things, right? Your pain and your brain fog and all, your MCAS, all of those things get really irritable. So yeah, challenging times.
It's been challenging. Yeah, you were saying there's another heat wave still to come, which is just
apparently
just crazy to think in England that another heat wave in September is coming. That is if that isn't a sign that global warming is a real thing, like, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, exactly. It's, it's very sad, I think, that we're experiencing this, not just obviously as a patient. I mean, as a whole environment, I think it's very sad. But that's a whole other discussion about global warming.
We'll have another podcast discussing global warming and what our respective countries' politicians are doing about that. But for now, let's circle back to hypermobility, which is how you and I got connected in the first place. So, for the listeners out there, just so that you know, I was a massive fangirl of Jeannie when I first started my own journey into hypermobility. You were one of the first accounts that I found on Instagram, and I was obsessed. I was like, who is this woman? I have to learn more. And then we got connected, which was just really lovely. And we met in person at the global conference last year in Toronto. And that was just so fabulous. And just before we start talking anymore, just as a patient and as a practitioner in this space, just what a huge fan I am of your work and everything you've done to get here. I think everything you've done for hypermobile people is just so, so fantastic. And before we go any further, I just want to give you a little wrap so that, we pump your tires a little bit before we go in any further. But thank you for everything that you have done. And I'm so excited to discuss more with you. But before we go into, because, oh my gosh, we have so much to talk about: the Zebra Club, your book, the most recent EDS conference in Dallas. But what I would love to hear from you is your journey and how you ended up in this space in the first place.
Gosh, yes. Well, thank you again for those kind words. But yeah, and you said I was one of the first accounts that you found, and my journey when I started talking about hypermobility, and I started seeing EDS patients, it was around 2010, so a long time ago. The EDS Society didn't even exist back then, and there was very little information out there. I didn't even know that I had hypermobile EDS back then. I only found out when I was 48. So I had a 35-year journey to get my diagnosis. So yeah, there wasn't much information around there when I started. And I started seeing these patients because a physio who I was seeing for myself was also specializing in hypermobility. So she started sending me all these patients, and I was like, gosh, I was fascinated, right? Most people are like, oh my God, I can't handle this. But I was like, this is so interesting that these people have this condition that affects every part of their body. I mean, what is this condition? I was just like, I need to know more. And that's kind of how my passion started, because I was just like, I just couldn't get my head around. I was like, this is incredible. So I started researching what I could back then. Obviously, there were research papers. As I said, the HMSA in the UK existed, EDS UK existed. But, information was quite limited, especially about movement. Of course, there was no real research into movement and how we work with these people. So that's how I started working and thinking. That's how the integral movement method really started to evolve, because I'm like, right, okay, I'm seeing all these patients. What do I do with them? And there's nothing out there about what I do with them. And as I said, there was research. So we knew that people had breathing pattern disorders. We knew from the research that people had proprioceptive issues. We knew that. We knew that people had problems with their shoulders, instability. We knew lots of things, but nobody said, okay, this is what we've got, and this is how we're going to fix it or deal with it or manage it. We just knew. So I knew they had breathing issues. I knew they had proprioceptive issues, blah, blah, blah. So what do I do with that? And that's how I started to create the integral movement method. So I'm working with these people. I need to help them. And that's how that was developed, breath and relaxation coming first. It's like, okay, these people are holding a lot of tension. They're not breathing. Why are they holding tension? They're bracing. We can't just leave them like that and expect them to go do exercise. That's never going to work. So we have to deal with that. And then we can work on proprioception and stability, and then balance. And I don't just mean balance, can you stand on one leg and, do a single leg squat? I mean, the balance, the emotional, the psychological side of living with this condition. No one was really talking about that. And the gaslighting and the stress of living with these conditions. So balance was a big part of it, physical and emotional, and then eventually posture and how you sort of integrate all of that and the way you hold yourself. So that's how that developed. And then I just started working with more and more patients. And then around 2017, my mum got very sick, and she sadly passed away very quickly with cancer. It was very, very quick. And the shock of that coupled with the fact that I went into perimenopause at the same time. The shock of that just sent me into a downward spiral. Of course, I still didn't know that I had any condition myself. And I got really, really unwell. And for about 3 years, I was very unwell. And it turns out I had mast cell activation syndrome or disorder. People are now debating what this is called. But anyway, I had issues with my mast cells. And through that, they were like, oh, have you heard of this thing called EDS? And of course, I'm like, yeah, I've heard of it. And of course, they did the clinical diagnosis because there is no testing for it. And I got my diagnosis that way. So I'd been working with the community a long, long time, kind of, you kind of know, right? You're like, oh, I have all those symptoms as well. Could I have? But I never went to look for a diagnosis, And I think like many people, you just manage it. You think this is normal, right? I've had headaches my whole life. I've had, shoulder issues my whole life. I've had gut issues my whole life. It's just normal, right? It's just what people deal with. So I didn't go looking for a diagnosis, but I got it because I got so unwell. And then, coming out the other side and the book and the Zebra Club started in 2019. First as a little platform with a handful of members, and then we became a bigger platform in 2021. And we've kind of grown from there. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question. Sorry.
It was long and beautiful. What a journey you've been through. And you were right there all along. You were in amongst the community. And I think you're right in saying that, a lot of us who end up in this space do have lived experience, but I recognize a lot of the time the story goes that you gravitate towards this population and then you realize, hang on, I think this might be me. I know that's definitely my story. And I know a few people who I can think of who have a similar experience. And, it's just so incredible that you've been working in this space for so long. And I guess to see how far we've come along those, 16 years you've been working in this space, which is just an incredible amount of time when you think of it like that, as to see the evolution of how we look at HEDS and HSD and hypermobility in general. I think that it's just credit to you for being a big part of that evolution as well, because you're right in saying we have more understanding now, but I think that there is still that gap in knowledge, especially when it comes to how do we get hypermobile people strong? We know that strength is a really important part as far as stabilizing joints, reducing risk of injury, reducing pain. But where do we start? How do we do it? And that's often the question I find myself facing with people is they come in going, I've been told this, but I don't know where to start. Yeah. And I think that's where the Zebra Club work that you've done has been so incredible. As a spectator watching from the outside looking in, it looks like it's kind of bridging that gap between where do we start and how do we actually start it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and sadly, like you say, that whole narrative of you're hypermobile, you need to get stronger. What, how, that's still around, still very much a thing, right? People are still told that, or they're told, oh, there's nothing that can be done, so good luck, which is also untrue. But these things are still out there, unfortunately, despite all the education. I'm also an educator for the EDS Society and for Polestar Pilates here in the UK. But that narrative is still out there, despite us doing all this education and all the good work of people like yourselves and all the practitioners and the EDS Society and not everyone shouting about this. But things take time. But the Zebra Club really, it goes through my integral movement method, but we have 3 principles as well. That we start with safety, which is, not just your environment being safe. I mean, you feeling safe in your body. So nervous system regulation, and that's where the breath and the relaxation come in. Safety first, then stability, and then strength. Because what I was seeing, as I said earlier, people would come and see me and they're like this, right? Holding their shoulder, they're not breathing, everything's stuck, their ribs don't move, And it's like, how on earth could you ask someone to do strength training when their shoulders are up to their ears? They don't even know where their body is in space. So you can imagine, what sort of muscles are they going to be recruiting? They're certainly not going to be recruiting the right muscles. And you give them some biceps or whatever, start pulling on a band, or the things that people are given straight on. They go to a physio and it's like, do these exercises. And you're like, how is it possible you think that person's going to be able to do that? So I was like, no, I'm stripping it back. I need solid foundations yes, of course, strength training is important. I love strength training. It's taken me a long time. That's the other thing, right? People go, strength training, it's okay to lift heavy weights. Yes, but it takes a long time to get there. I mean, it's taken, I'm not ashamed to say, it's taken me years, and I still have to go slow, because if I start going too heavy, my shoulders, everything says, nope, we're not doing that. So if someone's listening and they're starting a strength journey, don't worry that it's taking a long time. It does take us a long time to build that, I think, capacity to lift and to do strength training. So don't worry about that, because I think our tissues are super sensitive, right? It doesn't take a lot for them to get annoyed and angry about what you might be doing in your exercise. So go low, go slow. It's okay. So yeah, I think that answered your question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Another long answer. Sorry.
I love it. I'm here for the long answers. Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more that there is still that issue with the narrative. And, I think that I say it often, hypermobility is complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. We just need to start with the foundations, as you said. And I really love that point that you made about the safety and safety within your body. What are some of the, I guess, safety starting points that you like to start with when you're working with a client?
I love creating that sense of safety for people, because it's something that most people have never experienced in their bodies. They feel they're in this body that's always let them down, that's always flaring up, is always causing them pain. And they've never really connected with their bodies in a different way. Their body has been a thing of annoyance, frustration, even grief, maybe, if you've I've lost my, that, some people can suddenly become symptomatic, and, what happened overnight and now I'm in pain. So there's a lot of emotions around this. And that's what was really important to me, is that when I started, nobody was really looking at what's the emotional side of this illness. How are people coping with this? And then you're asking them to do exercise. Obviously, I'm not a psychologist. I'm talking about the emotional side in relation to, then I've got to move and do some exercise. That just didn't seem to be matching up. So breath, that's why I was drawn to breath, so I will have people lie down supine. I don't do, as a movement therapist, I don't do manual adjustments. I'm not a physio. I don't do things like that, but I do a lot of hands-on touch, and I like to support the body, and I like to feel how the tissue is changing. And it's a beautiful thing, because if you have, and you will know, when you first put someone on a table and they're lying there and everything's tight and stiff and they can't breathe, and then you put a gentle touch and you guide them and you say, can you feel my hand? Can you let this soften into my hand? And you can feel a lifetime of tension start to just melt away, and you can feel the release in your hand. And it's a beautiful thing. And you often sometimes then get a lot of emotion. People start crying, releasing, because if you've been like this your whole life and then you suddenly realize, wow, I can let go. It's a very emotional thing. So it's letting people build a relationship with themselves in a different way that they didn't have, and feeling the softness and the release, and feeling, because once you start feeling, I'm very much, if you've ever listened to any of my videos, I talk a lot about sensation. So can you feel the set? Can you feel the weight of your pelvis? Can you feel the weight? Because people go, what? What are you on about? What does that mean? Because you've never done it, right? Because we lie on the mat and we're like, okay, this is going to hurt. And I've been asked to do exercise and I'm really scared about exercise and I've hurt myself before. And so everything's a little bit tight. And so when you start saying, can you actually feel that and feel the softening? It's like, oh my gosh, I feel totally different. Right? People go, I've never felt this before. I had a lovely story, actually. Well, it's not lovely. It had a lovely ending. I had a lady a few years ago who's doing amazingly well now. Talking of strength training, she was 61 when she came to see me. And she was a classic bracing. Yeah, she had a lot of pain. She was HEDS. And when I lay her down, she came with her husband the first time because she'd had a lot of bad experiences and she wasn't sure who I was and if, was it going to work? So her husband came and he sat in the corner, and she was one of the classic not breathing. Rib cage was like a cage, right? It did not move. And so the first lesson, obviously, we talked and we went through everything and we did the safety. We lay down, we did the breathing, I was hands-on, and that was pretty much all we did. for the first session. The next week without her husband. So that was a good sign. She obviously trusted me a little bit. And she said, you know what? Remember, she's 61. She said to me, I've been given permission to relax for the first time in my life. So this is a 61-year-old lady who never felt she could. And the fact that she used the word permission, that we're so hard on ourselves and we hold ourselves together. And so that was her. That was the start of her journey. And now she's amazing. I mean, she's collected all the exercises we've ever done. She's got this big spreadsheet and she does exercise every day and she's doing weights and she's doing this and that. Incredible. It's amazing. It's sad that it took to be in your 60s but it goes to show that it's never too late, right? If anyone is listening and they're like, oh, I'm 50, I'm 60, I'm 70, there's nothing that can be done. There absolutely is something that can be done. So please don't ever give up hope. Age doesn't matter. We can always do something.
You're never too old to start something new. And wow, that story, it's given me like tingles, shivers down my spine thinking about that beautiful connection that woman was able to build within her own body. And it's so interesting listening to you talk about the safety within one's body, because I think really similarly, the way I work with my clients is very similar, because I always encourage this connection within the body. And I think living in bodies that are painful, that you maybe can't trust because you might fall down if you accidentally step the wrong way, or your shoulder might dislocate if you sleep wrong. These things, they break the trust that you have within your body. And I think one of the things that I find as well in that regard is not only that the trust is broken, and not only is there a lot of like content held towards the body, like this hatred towards the body, but also we live in a society now where we are so overstimulated and focused on multitasking and, eating on the go and, being on the phone but writing an email, or, running on the treadmill but listening to music, or, watching TV or whatever else it is. We are so overstimulated and overengaged that I think a lot of the time we lose connection with our body because we don't actually take the time to be mindful as to how it's moving. And I often talk about this with my clients, of the idea of moving with intention and actually slowing down your movement enough that you can pay so much attention to it that you can actually let your pelvis go heavy, or let your diaphragm go soft, or, actually breathe into your lower rib cage, breathe into your upper rib cage, whatever it is. I think that there is so many factors as to why we lose that safe feeling within our bodies, but rebuilding that is so important before starting any exercise journey. So I could not agree with that point more. And I think it just goes to show what a fabulous therapist that you are, that you're so in tune with people's bodies. So that is so beautiful to hear, and what a lovely story. So on that note, then obviously the safety element is one big part of the Zebra Club. And then you mentioned building the stability. So tell me a little bit more about your processes when it comes to that. How do you usually like to start?
Yeah. Well, I think, proprioception and stability tend to go hand in hand. So I think breath and relaxation are best friends. You start doing one and the other one comes along for the ride. And the same with proprioception. When you start working on proprioception, stability is like, oh, I'll come along for the ride. So they tend to be best friends as well. One thing I learned very quickly, and again, it went against the tradition out there back then of, how do we train that? How do we really train proprioception and stability? And at the time it was, and I was going up against a lot of physios who were like, oh no, but they were like, you have to train stability and proprioception from end of range. So you put a hypermobile person into end range and they have to learn how to build strength at end range. Yes and no, because that tells me that we don't really understand hypermobile bodies and how they work. Because if you've already put an untrained hypermobile body, I'm not talking about dancers and gymnasts who have been trained how to control their body, totally different. I'm talking about normal hypermobile people who have very little body awareness. Once you've put them end of range, they can't really feel it. They've got no control. The control has been lost. right? You know what it's like. You put someone on, one of the things I do is I put them on the table and say, I call them supine arms. Can you lift your arms up and do an arm roll, and take your arms overhead? And a lot of people can do that and their arms will just flop to the table behind them, right? And they're like, yeah, I can do that. That's easy. Well, what are you feeling? What muscles are nothing? Because they can. How are they ever going to learn how to stabilize or control that when they've just collapsed into end of range? I'm like, that's not going to work. So I start with reducing the range significantly, like even 50% sometimes. Certainly go to where you can without pain. I don't want them going into pain. And honestly, people would hate it because they go, this is really hard. And they're like, I feel that. I'm like, yeah, it's hard because your muscles are now having to do some work. They're having to stabilize, and you're much more aware of where your arms or your legs or whatever are in space. So we start in a much smaller range. And I'm not saying that you have to stay in the small range, of course not. But once you've got that control, proprioception, you've got some awareness, some stability, then let's make it bigger. And if we want to do full range, let's do full range, but it has to come from a place that you can control, right? Very much, as you mentioned, slow. To build stability, I think you have to go slow because the slowness builds the sensitivity that you need to build body awareness. The whole thing is like a package, right? They're not individual things. And then I'll improve my proprioceptive awareness. So yeah, starting very slow, very small range. Breath has to be integrated into that. It's not brace your core and try and lift your leg and do a bridge and all that. No, the body doesn't work like that. It's integrated, right? It's not breath holding and then move. So again, very much against, my background. I trained in 2007 as Pilates teacher. And Pilates is very much, certainly back then and sadly and still in some places, your core, navel to spine hollowing, lift up your pelvic floor to 80%, whatever that means, and it's like, it just never made sense to me. I'm like, I can't work like that. So it's not something I ever went with. It's just like the body isn't little isolated packages of muscles. Everyone's talking to everyone else. Everyone's got to work with everyone else. So it's integration. And that's why it's integral movement method, right? Because everything is integrated, even your breath. So yeah, breath plays a huge part in stability. So yeah, that's how I work on those. And again, it was difficult because I really had to put my head up. What's the expression? Your head out of the parapet or something, I had to expose myself and go up against a lot of this traditional thinking. And people didn't like it, but I'm like, this is what I see and this is what's working. And I'm going to stick with it. And I did. And now I'm educating physios and physical therapists how to help people with hypermobility move. So it's catching on. It's been a journey. As you say, I've been here for 16 years. So it's not an overnight thing. It takes time.
Absolutely. And credit to you for, putting yourself out there and saying, no, this isn't right. And I'm going to trust my gut and trust my instincts that there has to be a different way. And I think that makes you such a pioneer in this space. And I think that's why you are so highly regarded and highly respected in the EDS world, is because you went against the grain and said, no, what we're doing is wrong. And there has to be a better way for hypermobile people. And, again, it's complex. Doesn't have to be complicated. We need different parameters for hypermobile people. But once we implement those, then your options are unlimited. So yeah, I think credit to you for being a pioneer in that space. On that note, you are a very highly regarded specialist, I'll say. I'll put you in the specialist category in the EDS space. And you recently presented at the conference in the US. Tell me about that experience and what that was like.
Yes. Just back in July, so a few weeks ago, the EDS Global Learning Conference in Dallas. It was really interesting, actually, what they asked me to talk about. Kind of ties into what we've been talking about. So obviously, I'm a movement therapist. So typically, I talk about movement and fascia and, all movement related things. And this time they actually asked me to talk about patient innovation, which I thought was really nice. And basically, we've touched on sort of lived experience. So they wanted me to talk about that evolution of how patients, and there's a lot of us, right? There's now a lot of patients who are out there changing how things are done, right? But they wanted me to talk about how patients innovation has sort of how this evolves. So yes, I was a patient, so I had all my lived experience. Then I became a clinician. I was a movement therapist, for many, many years. And through my work, I explained how I developed the IMM, the integral movement method. And then it was like, okay, I've got this integral movement method. It needs a home. So the Zebra Club became the home of the integral movement method, so I could then share it with more people rather than me doing one-to-one appointments. And then it's like, okay, still there's only me. I need to share this with other educators, other clinicians who can then help their patients. So how they really wanted me to talk about how this sort of, I guess it's an ecosystem, would you call it that? It grew from being a patient to then being sort of, we're now a global patient organization, with members in 30 countries around the world. So how did that happen? And as I say, it wasn't an overnight thing. It's taken a long time. So yeah, I was very, very happy that they invited me to actually talk about that. And I think it's probably really important because with everything that's changing this year, they're very interested in people's lived experiences. So I also was fortunate enough to be invited to take part in a focus group while I was there as part of their research for all the changes. If people don't know, there's new criteria coming at the end of this year that's going to, significantly change the diagnostic criteria that's been in place since 2017. So yeah, I took part in a focus group with people from, obviously there was only a handful of us, but people from the UK. So we were around a table and we all talked about our lived experiences, and that's all being fed into their research. So yeah, it was really nice actually. And my favorite, I got to do movement snacks. So in the breaks, because obviously we're sitting for hours and hours, and we know with hypermobile bodies, if we don't move, things can often get worse, right? So sitting for 8 hours is often not the most comfortable of things for us. So during the breaks, I was up on stage doing little movement snacks, which was really good fun, and just very gentle things, again, seated, that people could do at home or in the conference, just to move the body a little bit, which is really important.
It's such an irony, isn't it, that everyone goes to a conference to sit for hours on end when majority of people in that room have some kind of lived experience with HEDS, and they are maybe neurodivergent as well, and moving around and on the floor and standing up. Yeah. It's such a unique community to be a part of, I think, especially as a practitioner, given that so many people in the room typically have lived experience. And I think that's what I love so much about the EDS Society and what they are doing to really take on board the feedback from practitioners who are on the field, right, on the ground level, doing the work, from the researchers who are looking for answers, and then from people with lived experience, patients all around the world. I think that it is one of the most unique areas of healthcare and medicine to be a part of. And I think it just makes it so, so special that it really is like its own little community and its own little, I guess, ecosystem in a way as well.
Yeah.
I think it's just it's so, so unique. And it's something really hard to explain to people what it feels like going to these conferences. And obviously last year when I went to the Toronto conference in Canada, that was my first global experience of me leaving the country to go to a conference. And, I went on my own, but I felt like I had family there. Like I was so welcomed and so many people were willing to just chat and have conversations. And I absolutely loved that experience. And I think it really is such a unique field to be a part of. And, with the new criteria coming at the end of this year, it is a really exciting time to be part of this community. So stay tuned for the updates coming at the end of the year. Okay, well, oh my God, I could talk to you forever. It is getting dark here in Melbourne. So you'll see that my light, if anyone's watching this on YouTube, you'll see that the light on my face has changed. That's because it's getting dark outside. But that also means that I need to get cracking and start asking you some questions from the audience. So, okay, so the first question that's come through, Jeannie, is about the ITB, so the iliotibial band. So some tips for constant issues with iliotibial band, and it's on one side. So the question is, I've rephrased it a little bit, but it's about having constant issues with the iliotibial band on one side. Is this related to hypermobility?
Oh, gosh, well, I can't really say if it's related, because lots of people, whether you're hypermobile or not, are going to experience ITB band issues for various reasons. So I'm not going to say yes, it's because of your hypermobility. If you were my patient, I'd be looking at the whole body. So how are you walking? What's your foot doing? What's your knee doing? What's your pelvis doing? Is there restrictions around that pelvis? Why is it on one side? Are you slightly shifted on one side? Are you slightly hiked on one side? All sorts of things I'd be looking at. And then I'd want to be looking at, how does the pelvis move? Has it got freedom to move? So yeah, all of that. One thing I wouldn't do is again, I'd probably get shot again for this, but foam rolling, I wouldn't be advising foam rolling of the ITB band. I know a lot of people say, and again, if it works for you, then that's fine. But it's not something I ever advocate for, because I prefer, if you want to do something with it and touch it and massage it, I prefer sort of a handheld roller, like a physio one. Those spiky balls that are on a roller and you can roll it up. I prefer that to a foam roller where you're putting all your body weight on the ITB band and then having to roll up and down. Because also, if you are hypermobile, even getting into that position with hypermobile shoulders and trying to roll up and down an ITB band can be really quite challenging. And then all of your body weight going onto this piece of hard foam can cause a lot of bruising and sensitivity. So if you feel like you need to do something, get a little, even a tennis ball or a spiky ball, and do it that way where you're in control of the amount of pressure you put on it. So that's one element, but you would really need to look at your movement patterns and say, why am I only getting it? The fact that it's only on one side is really interesting to me, because that tells me that there's some sort of movement pattern issue, alignment issue going on.
Really great answer for a very tough question. I think that was a brilliant answer. And yes, everyone is different. And, I would agree with you on the foam roller. I think the foam roller of the ITB band had its moment like 20 years ago. And I think we've moved beyond that now. So if anyone's going to come after you with pitchforks after saying that on this podcast,
then have come up and you put pitchforks when I talk about this. It's still out there. See, again, that old narrative. There are still these old narratives still out there. But, again, if it works for you, fabulous. I'm not going to say, I'm just saying it's not my choice of exercise.
Yeah. I would agree. Second question is Pilates the best form of exercise for a hypermobile person?
Great question. First of all, not all Pilates is the same, right? So there are lots of different schools, lots of different degrees of training. Some people can become a Pilates teacher after one weekend of training, so that's the first thing. So you can't really put Pilates, I know it goes under this umbrella, but not all Pilates teachers are created equal, like not all physios or osteopaths are created equal, right? So it very much depends on the person that you're working with, and do they understand hypermobility, EDS? Are they prepared to learn about hypermobility and EDS? That's one aspect. But the other thing I'd like to say is that despite coming from a Pilates background, I think the best exercise is whatever you happen to enjoy. So I'm not going to enforce Pilates on everyone and say you must do. Of course not. Some people want to do Tai Chi. Some people want to go to the gym. Some people love running. Some people love hiking. Whatever you love is the best exercise for you. But yeah, that's my view on that.
That's the best answer. And that is a consistent answer. I get this question a lot for this podcast, is what is the best kind of exercise for hypermobile people? And consistently it is whatever you love is the best exercise. Yeah. So I love that answer. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Okay, the final question is, what's the best advice for a non-hypermobile practitioner to help hypermobile clients?
Very good. Well, great that as a non-hypermobile practitioner, you're interested in this population, which is fabulous, because we need more and more practitioners who are interested in helping this population. So there's lots of resources and education out there now. like your podcast, for example. But I also educate for, as I said, the EDS Society. And people who come on the courses aren't all hypermobile practitioners. So I think the best thing is to immerse yourself, to learn as much as you can. I mean, when I started, I didn't even know I was hypermobile. I know that sounds crazy. I didn't know I didn't know anything. I had to learn all about this myself, but I immersed myself in it. And if you're really interested in it, as I said, there's so much resource out there now. Really dive deep, learn as much as you can, go on some training courses. If you're in Australia, you do some great training courses for practitioners as well. You seek out the people that are doing the education, go on a course, see if you like it, see if you like what you hear. Does that excite you, or does that it's important, right? Because you want to know, do I really love this, or actually, no, that's not for me, So going on a course can be really helpful in helping you make that decision. But yeah, just learn, read, dive deep into it. You don't have to. There's this misconception, isn't there, that you have to be hypermobile in order to work with hypermobile patients. That's just not true. What you do need is empathy, right? One thing that's sadly missing, we need empathy. We need people who listen, who really listen to these patients and don't just make assumptions and dismiss them. If you're of that mindset that you're patient and willing to listen and learn, absolutely go for it. You don't need to be hypermobile to do a great job.
Yeah, I was literally thinking that exact thing as you were talking. I was like, yeah, there is a misconception that you need to be hypermobile to work with this population. People ask me all the time. They'll say, oh, are you hypermobile? And up until recently, I would just say, oh, no, not really. But only recently, I've really just gone, well, no, actually, I have my own problems.
Yeah.
But I think that, you do not have to be hypermobile to be interested in helping hypermobile people. And I would agree with you. Start looking at courses or read some books or listen to some podcasts, but most importantly, listen to your patient. That is all it is. If you listen to your patient or your client and they're telling you that they don't feel stable, or they don't know what muscles they're supposed to use, or they do all this glute work, but they never feel their glutes, they are all clues that person is maybe having a hard time understanding where their body is in space. So listen to your client, use empathy, which is a skill that we have working in healthcare and fitness. Use your empathy to help them understand that even though you don't know everything about what they're going through and you don't have personal experience, you care enough to find out more. That's all it takes. Just be curious. Care enough to find out more. I love that. We're just so weird, like two little peas in a pod, aren't we? Same, but different. This has been such a great chat, Jeannie. I could talk to you all day. But as we start to wind up, what would be your top 3 takeaways for the listeners today?
Well, never give up hope that something can be done. Absolutely. And I know hope is something we often lose, but please don't give up hope. As we said earlier, doesn't matter where you are today in terms of capacity, age, ability, there's always something that can be done. And thirdly, I think really important, because we often start to doubt ourselves, listen to your gut, your instincts, listen to your body. And I know that can be hard because we're so disconnected. But if something doesn't feel right, if someone's asking you to do thousands of repetitions of one exercise and it's hurting and you're just not feeling that you're making progress, it's not right for you, listen to your body. Yeah, you are your best doctor. You know your body better than anybody. So listen, if it's sending you messages that it's not happy, it doesn't feel safe with what you're doing, and I know it's hard to advocate for ourselves. That's a whole other topic, but try, don't be afraid to say, actually, these aren't working for me. Can we try something different? Yeah. And don't be afraid to change practitioner. If that person's not listening to you, we were just saying, if they're not empathetic, if they're not listening, it's okay to change and go and find someone else.
Absolutely. You're still in control. You can still choose. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Great takeaways there, Jeannie. Well, as we start to wind down what has been a just beautiful chat, I would like to ask you a few questions that I ask to all my guests. So the first question is, what is one hack that has changed your life?
It would be, I don't know if this is a hack, but the thing that's really changed my life is actually learning to rest. So I was very much, I've got to keep going, rest. I haven't got time for rest. And actually, I have to rest. I have to build rest into my day in order to be at my best. So ditching the guilt about resting and actually making that an integral part of how I function.
Great hack. And I'll definitely take a leaf out of your book and schedule rest time. What would be one bit of advice you would like to give to your younger self?
I guess that everything's going to be okay in the end. I grew up being told I was a hypochondriac and that I was just an attention seeker and there was nothing wrong with me and all of that. But again, trust, you're not a hypochondriac. Everything will work out in the end. Yeah. That's a tough one because I think so many of us have horrible journeys when we're younger, when people won't listen to us. But everything will be okay in the end.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And finally, and it's just one thing you would like to see change in our healthcare system.
Oh, Lord.
Can you do just one?
I can, and it's a big one. And I know I would like to see the education changed at medical schools or physiotherapy schools, or I'd like to, because from my understanding is people still only get maybe one slide or 10 minutes on connective tissue disorders. And can we please have, at least half a day lecture on connective tissue disorders, if it's at least half a day, more than just one slide on this. I think if we could change that and have people at least be aware of it or even get interested in it much earlier on, think of how all the practitioners coming out into the world would be so different, because they wouldn't be like, oh, EDS what's that? And no, never heard of that, or no, that's not related. Wouldn't it be amazing if everyone coming out of medical school was like, yeah, I know what that is, and yeah, I understand that it's multisystemic, and yeah, I totally understand that you've got gut issues and breathing issues and pain. I get all of that. Wouldn't that be amazing if that happened? So that's what I'd like. It's a big one, but I would love that.
I would love that too, and I hope for any people listening who are involved in university education, hear us now. We are ready to educate. We are there, part of the change, because it's got to start at the university level so that more graduates are coming out aware of what connective tissue disorders look like and how they can impact the body. So I totally agree. So, Jeannie, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for spending your morning in London with me. It is now officially nighttime here in Melbourne, but thank you so much for spending your time with me and with our listeners today. How can our listeners find you, and how can they find your book online?
Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. So I have a website, which is jeanniedibon.com. But if you're interested in the Zebra Club, we just launched a new website, actually, which has got a lot more information about our research and things like that. And we've got a new scientific advisory board, so you can read all about that. So that's thezebra.club. So www.thezebra.club. My book is definitely on Amazon. So do you manage to order it in Australia on Amazon? Or no, you've got a separate book distributor, haven't you, in Australia?
We do have Amazon. And I actually bought your book. I think I got it sent from the UK. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah. So I will look that up. I believe it would be available on Amazon, but I got this on like a pre-order. So
yeah. The publisher is Handspring Publishing. So you can also purchase directly from their website as well. So they might do worldwide distribution as well. So that's how you can find me. That's how you can find me, find my book. Lovely. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you for being here. This has been such a great chat. And I think for anyone looking to find Jeannie, she also has an amazing YouTube channel with lots of awesome videos that you can check out for free, and also follow her on Instagram at Jeannie Di Bon. So
Jeannie D.
I'll pop that in the show notes so that everyone can find you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jeannie, for joining, and thank you to all the listeners for tuning in. This has been an awesome episode of the Invisible Podcast. Make sure that you subscribe to this so you can keep up to date with new episodes. And if you have any guests that you would like me to chat to, please feel free to drop a line on my own Instagram, which is at doc_Ashton with 2 N's at the end. But until then, we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye.